Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Everyday Strong with Dr. Michael G. Downs. This is your host, CB Baker. We got another great topic today. Unfortunately and fortunately, today will be our last episode for the year. So you won't see us again officially with a new episode until 2022. But I will be uploading some clips and highlights of stuff we've done for the year, so y'all won't be without us in Dr. Daniel's infinite wisdom and insight. All right. So Dr. Daniels, the topic today is blended families. And you hit me with this topic. I said, well, I have dated women before that had kids and been in a long-term relationship with women that had kids. And I can say from my perspective, it was difficult to deal with the other ex. And one of the things you hit me with was the dynamics of everything with the exes and all the stuff coming in, the baggage and everything. And let's unpack some of that today. Today's episode may be lengthy. It is our last one for the year. So let's dive in here and see if we can get some answers or some advice on how to handle things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, personal experience because, my parents were divorced. And so I'm a product of a blended family on both sides. My mother remarried and my father remarried. And when my father remarried, there was children. She brought children into the relationship. And of course, my father brought children into the relationship. And that's a difficult thing. And there's so many things that create stressors. A marriage that is not blended can be stressful in and of itself, just because you got two people coming together with two different outlooks on life. You may be in love, but that doesn't mean your outlook on life is exactly the same because you came from different backgrounds. You had two families that had different value systems and all that. Now you come into a relationship where not only do you have that to deal with, the fact that there are two separate families that will grow up two separate ways, but now you have the pain that came from the first marriage that also comes into the second marriage or to the, and I know people say, well, no, I didn't bring my pain with me, but that's an impossible thing to do. It's impossible not to remember pain. God gives us memory for a reason, and it's a blessing to have memory. He gives us memory for pain so we won't repeat the same mistakes.
Right.
That's why the body experiences pain. With pain, something is wrong.
Or hot stove.
Right. Something's wrong, so to stop moving forward. And so when you come into that relationship, each person comes to us having had an ex, right? And that's the first thing right there is you have had an ex, but an ex also caused you pain. That's why you're not together.
Right.
And so you come with that. And so you come hoping that the person you are with will not bring you pain. So there is a little bit of suspicion in each of us. You're looking out for some things, And if anything closely comes to that point where you experienced that pain before, that puts you on notice.
Yeah.
And so, and that's why the Bible talks about marriage the way it does, because it's difficult to get around that kind of stressor,
Yeah.
And then it could be, especially a blended family means children, right?
Right.
So it also means the exes will always be a part of the relationship, because it's their children.
Right.
And so if it's for the new wife, the old wife is always a part of the relationship.
Right.
Because those are her biological children. And she's a part of what those children look forward to or look up to, and vice versa. To the new husband, those children have a father, and that father doesn't want, the stepdad chastising their kids. But not only that, they have already developed a norm of what's reasonable and what's not reasonable.
Right.
And the norms may not be the same for both groups.
Now, in a perfect world, every individual in this scenario would humble themselves to be able to come together and get to an agreement of some sort, where emptying themselves of baggage that they've had and not bringing into the new dynamic. But we already know that's not the case.
Well, not only is it not the case, but let's say the adults did that. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the two adults said, listen, we both have had exes. We're going to divorce them from our minds and our hearts. And what they did to us will never be in this relationship. Let's say we could do that.
Right.
But we can't expect the children to do that.
Yeah.
See, because the children's loyalty to their biological parents will not end.
Right.
So even though the parents may do it, we can't expect the child to say, well, I'm not going to listen to what my other parent tells me anymore.
Right.
That wouldn't even be fair, either. So that's a part of the stressor. That's a part of the dynamic. Because now let's just use an example where there is a biological mother that still loves her children, but you are divorced, and that man got custody, right?
Right.
That biological mother still wants to have some influence over her child, and she should, because that's her child.
Right.
She wants say-so over that child, right? And so her values about how to raise that child may be different than the stepmom's values. Like, for example, the mom may say something simple. The mom may say, C's and B's are fine.
Right.
I'm comfortable with C's and B's on a report card. The stepmom may say, no, I'm only comfortable with A's and B's on the report card.
Right.
Right. So the child is striving for C's and B's. Biological mom is praising, beautiful job. Stepmom, who you live with, is saying, that's unacceptable. And since you didn't get A's and B's, I want that cell phone.
Right.
Biological mom says, hey, I paid for that cell phone, not you.
Right.
So therefore, he gonna keep that cell phone. Stepmom goes to biological dad and say, hey, I need you to step in, right? I'm saying it's that kind of stressors, and we're gonna talk about solutions too.
So who was right in that scenario?
Both are right. That's the issue, though. See, and that's my point. See, both are right. Why? Because you have a right to your own set of values. So the question that we have to look at is never who's right, but how can we make things happy, right? So again, we'll walk through and talk about solutions as well, because we need to, right?
Right.
People want solutions. But the other thing I just want to bring out is we have values is also about money, right? I mean, everybody doesn't view money the same way.
That's a fact.
Right? And so that's another stressor, because in a blended family, we don't always come with the same assets. One person may have had a home. One person may have been living in an apartment. Or it could be two people that have homes, right? But the debt is not equal.
Right.
So your finance isn't equal.
Right.
Your debt isn't equal. And how you manage money isn't equal. And so that becomes a stressor, because here's what we know. More marriages break up over money than infidelity.
Right.
So if you start out with an unequal, financial situation, it tends to exacerbate itself, because one person may say things like this: I want my children to wear nothing but the best, right?
Yeah.
I got this 4-year-old and he's going to wear Air Jordans.
Right.
And one person may say, you have lost your mind.
Right.
A 4-year-old who's going to be growing out of the shoes in 3 months is not going to be spent. We're not going to.
All right. We ain't spending $70 on the Air Jordan.
Right. Or they don't get an iPhone 13.
Right.
But one person may say, oh, yes, they are too. Because their value of money is different. That's another stressor. So I'm just saying, these are just some of the stressors that cause problems. That is not impossible to overcome, but it certainly requires some delicacies, I'll say.
This seems like one of them scenarios where you honestly need a playbook, where if this, then that, for every type of scenario. Like if you're familiar with the people listening, if you're familiar when you watch football and the guy's holding a laminate piece of paper, is that piece of paper is the what to do when the offense or defense does certain things, and we respond by doing X, Y, and Z. Right. I'm so happy that I'm married and have, not in the blended family situation. Because what you just described sounds like pure hell.
And it can be. Now, we have a playbook, right?
The Bible.
Right. But few people use the Bible, in those instances. And there's a reason why they don't. I'm saying few people. There's a reason why they don't. Because their personalities are why they are where they are.
Right.
Now, here's what I'm important to you, right? A blended family means that both of us couldn't stay with our first spouse.
Right. That's right.
So if both of us couldn't stay with our first spouse, it is possible that it could be because one person had been widowed or something like that.
Right.
But that's unusual. Usually it's because both of us couldn't handle our first spouse. The reason why we couldn't handle our first spouse is because we did not understand how to properly handle conflict in the relationship. Mm-hmm. So if I didn't know how to handle conflict in a relationship initially, when I get married the second time, it's exacerbated again because of the other stressors, plus the fact that I couldn't handle conflict the first time, which means that I didn't use the Bible the first time. Right. So obviously it ain't on my list of priorities the second time, right?
Right.
So, but your point is well taken when you say, so, how can we do that? How do we resolve that? I'll say this, and I was a product of a blended family. My father remarried. I spent time living with him. I've often said this. One of the wisest men I have known was my father. Did not have a college degree, but boy, he had wisdom. The way he dealt with a blended family, I think, serves as a model. It really does, in my opinion, serve as a model. And I applaud him for his leadership in that way because it worked out well. It didn't work out well for my older two brothers, but I think he learned from that. And so by the time I stayed with him, he had learned and the whole dynamic was different, right? And this is where I say that. Before I came to live with my father, him and my stepmom had already decided how discipline would take place. Mm-hmm. They had already decided it. It was unique, in my opinion, but it was already decided. Now, and here's the thing, and she agreed to it. She said to my father, I will discipline my children, and you can discipline my children. But you discipline your child, not me. And she said that because she said mothers are more sensitive to other women disciplining their children. Now, I didn't know all this until later on,
Right.
But that's what they did. So my stepbrother and I could both do something crazy, and we did do a lot of crazy stuff, right?
Right.
And we would get home, and one day, for example, one day the police beat us home. Okay. And so we get a phone call at my stepsister's house and say, hey, listen, y'all need to come home right away. And so we get home and we see police cars, 2 or 3 cars on the street, one in the driveway. And she said, I want to know what's going on. And apparently we was at the YMCA and the lady said we stole a pocketbook. So, which we didn't. But we did get some of the money that came from the stolen pocketbook. But we didn't actually steal the pocketbook. Okay. I just orchestrated it. Yeah. So anyway, I orchestrated it, but I didn't steal.
Right.
But since I orchestrated it, I got the lion's share of the money. Okay. Now, but the lady didn't know it was me. She blamed my stepbrother because of the role I had him play.
Right.
He was the fake a fight. While she was messing with him, another guy was going to take the money. Right. So she figured that that's what they did together. Right. She didn't know that I was the one that orchestrated. So anyway, she come there and she's laying into him, and she looks at me and says, don't you think you're getting away with this either? You listen, I will whoop y'all, blah, 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 blah. And she said, you know what? No, I ain't even gonna whoop you because you need a real whooping. I'm gonna let your daddy whoop you. Light bulb went off right away in my head. I said, wait a minute. I know she know how to whoop it behind. Right. So that must means she ain't gonna whoop me. Right. Now I didn't tell her that, but that was in my head. It was in my head. So anyway, bottom line was, as a good liar, I lied my way out of it to the police. And I got my stepbrother out of it too. Now, because like I say, I was a good liar. And that's the way it goes. So my father comes home. She tells my father says, come here, I want to talk to you. He puts me in his car. We ride around for about an hour and he's just having a conversation with me. about what to do, what not to do, why I should do things differently, and why I should recognize that what I do to cause disruption in that family hurts him. And that's the way he put it. He said, I got to live with her. He said, you're going to leave one day. I got to stay there and live with her. And he said, so I don't need you to keep creating problems for me. He said, because the more you create problems for me, the harder you make it for me to be good to you. You know? And so that, to me, that was a dynamic way of looking at it. So he helped me put in perspective that I should treat her a certain way, because treating her a certain way showed my love for him.
Right.
And that's one thing I think that blended families often don't do, is that parents don't stop, and they rather than, what they do is they take up for their child. Mm-hmm. And so that creates that dissension in the home. Right. Whereas the child needs to understand, because again, I was 15 years old at the time. The child needs to understand that when you use leverage that way, you're hurting your own parent, because you're messing up their relationship.
Yeah. So did he ever find out that you was the ringleader of the thing?
He didn't find out I was the ringleader of that episode, but I'm sure he knew it, because he knew that I was the ringleader of most of the larcenies that happened around town. And actually, well, of course, my father's words are usually something like this. Listen, next time you're out there, I need X, Y. So can you hook me up one, two? Okay.
Because I found that was the reason why I asked that question, is because I found it interesting at the angle he took with you on that, and in order to get through.
Yeah. Because
whipping you wouldn't have got through.
No. That's why I say he was wise. He was a very wise man. And see, him and again, my stepmother and my father, they agreed, and this after they are married, right, that they learned from the first batch. And so they sat down and talked, and they agreed on what had to happen is this. My stepmother had to be acceptable to my father's punishment of me, even if it didn't meet her standard.
Right.
Because my father he never put his hands on me from, when I moved back with him. Never. And it wasn't like I stopped doing stupid stuff either. But he didn't. He would always just talk to me. That was his way of punishment. She used to knock her kids out. Okay? And her kids would even get mad and say, why come we getting whooping and Michael does not?
Right.
And I guess there was some animosity between them and me at times, but it didn't last long, because, when you're teenagers, it don't last long that way. But, and I'm sure that, and there were times I would hear them talking, and she would say to him, you really need to do this to him, right? And his response would be, he understands me. He knows what to do. It won't happen again. And if it does happen again, then I will do something different. So my father had I would call it an elevator way of punishing you. You started at the first floor.
Right.
Then you work your way up, right? And so I think that's what blended families don't often do, is that you need to start out with that up front. You need to come in up front saying, this is the tone we're going to take with our children. This is how we're going to treat them. This is how we're going to do this. And they have to agree to that, and then accept that because we do have, a child has been with you for 10 years expecting one form of punishment. You can't just change it after 10 years. You got to keep that same way of doing things alive, and vice versa. And you can't get mad at the spouse because how they discipline their children doesn't meet your expectation.
Right. Now, did y'all ever have a full family get together, like over holidays or Thanksgiving? Whereas your
all of my
well, and then the step kids and stepmom.
No, we didn't, because of the ages that we were, and we lived in different states. Right. That was the other thing. So some of them were too young to get down there, and the ones that were older were doing their own thing. Right. That was doing their own thing. So that was the thing. However, we all were friendly with each other, to a certain degree. I was as close to my step brothers and sisters as I was to my biological brothers and sisters.
The reason why I asked that is because I know if people are familiar with Bruce Willis and Demi Moore, they had a very bad divorce, but was able to come back together. Now they spend every Christmas, as a blended family. Now their kids is all adults now, but it's just interesting. I'm wondering. I always said to myself, I don't see that happening with a black family.
Well, let me say this: when my stepsisters have things going on, they always invite everybody. So, like if they have a birthday or retirement, they invite us. And I go. My brothers and sisters don't always go, but I always go.
Right.
So it's not like they don't try to include us. Their concept, and I will give them more credit than I give my own biological sisters and brothers. Their concept has always been that we were a family of 12.
Right.
That was always their concept.
Right.
That wasn't our concept, but that was their concept, And that's what, especially the oldest, which is my stepsister, that's what she would always say. She never, as a matter of fact, she treated me like I was her biological brother. I could borrow her car, but her biological siblings could not. Because she said I was the more responsible one.
Right.
And so and many times I would come home from school and she hadn't gone to work yet. And I would say, I need to go so-and-so place. And she would say, well, I ain't got time to take you. Here are the keys. She throw the keys to me, And even today, we still get together for those kind of things, for birthdays and things like that. So, but of course, we're all old as dirt now. So big difference anyway.
Right.
But I think that to me is a big part of it. And I think too is that you have to assess and determine what the actual role will be for the exes that still have a right to parent,
right,
but don't have a right to be in the relationship.
Right. So let's talk about that. Now we looked at from the perspective of yourself being inside. Mm-hmm. Now, do you know how your mother took it by any chance?
Oh, absolutely, because my mother's very vocal, as you well know. Absolutely. My mother was a part of a blended family too, because she remarried. So everybody, it's right. Both parties remarried. My mother made it very clear that her new husband could not put his hands on her children. Very clear. That's the difference between my stepmother and my mother. My stepmother said my father could discipline her children.
Right.
But my mother said, no, you cannot discipline my children. And so, but they established those boundaries up front. So it was known and everybody accepted it. Now, did my stepfather like it? No. My stepfather did not like that. And he voiced that opinion to my mother. She said, I don't care. Mm-hmm. These are my children. And that's the way it's going to go. And perhaps that's why he was an ex as well. I don't know.
Right.
But, it is what it is. I'm saying, the thing is this. It's like, for example, my mother did not want my stepmama to put her hands on her children. And my father knew that. So he probably voiced that to my stepmom too.
Right.
So they recognized that my mother would have a strong influence on my life, even though I was living in Durham.
Right.
So that was recognized. But it was also recognized that my mother would not be a part of that relationship in Durham, And it was the same thing. When I was living with my mother, it was recognized that my father, my biological father, would have a large role in parenting me, but he would not become a part of the relationship. He would not get into the relationship that my mother had with her new husband. And again, I think those boundaries need to be established as well. So when my father would come up here to visit me, it was no stress. Mm-hmm. No stress at all. My stepfather didn't get all bent out of shape.
Right.
It was none of that stuff. He came in the house, how y'all doing, shake hands, whatnot, so on and so on. And, he was welcomed into the house and everything. And that's just the way my stepfather never said he can't come or this or that. And, he brought gifts, for his children, took us, buy clothes and things like that. and you just leave. So, but see, they established that stuff up front, and you had to establish that stuff up front.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always clear, though, that he would not get interject into the relationship.
I have a friend of mine, older guy. He said every year he married a woman that had kids, and her baby daddy every year, every Christmas, would come and spend a week and a half in the house there. Mm-hmm. And I remember we were sitting there, we was at a cookout, and everybody looked at him like, who does that? And he said, hey, his answer was, if she's going to cheat on me with her ex-man, it don't make a difference if he's at the hotel down the street or in the house. If she's going to do it, she's going to do it. I can't sit around here and worry about whether or not it's going to happen.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Because, people going to do what they're going to do.
Right.
But again, but they established that up front. And see, when you establish it up front, it changes the dynamic. I think that's what people don't do. What they do is they wait until something happens, and then they argue about it. But you can't wait till it happens to argue about it. You have to look at the parameters before it happens, and then everybody has to agree to live in the parameters that you set. And that's the key thing. And again, I get that from my dad, because my father, that's how he treated me. He learned from his mistakes.
Right.
When I moved in with him, my father, he gave me basic rules. And he also gave me the basic punishments for the rules. And he said, here's the deal. I work 5 days a week. I get paid on Friday. He said, same thing gonna happen to you. He said, you act like a fool on Monday if you want to. I'm gonna bank it up till Friday. And then Friday, I'm doling out punishment. He said, but you can also get some good time. He said, so you got an opportunity. Right. You can mess up on Friday, you can straighten up on Wednesday. And if it equal out, when Friday comes, everything gonna be all right. But see, I knew ahead of time what the punishments were going to be. And since I knew what the punishments was going to be, and I had punishments also related to if my stepmother, if she said I did something, or if, something that she couldn't punish me for, she already knew what my father would do to punish me. Right. Right. And so the same thing. So I knew I couldn't really disrespect her, because I knew that there was a punishment for that too. And so since everybody knew that up front, it was like, well, okay. And there were times that I did, say some things where I probably should, that were not, I guess, appropriate. There were never anything bad, but there were times when I would say things like this. Well, my mother allows me to do X, Y, Z. Right. And then she would look at me with teary eyed, because she's a very sensitive woman, and she would say, well, I'm not trying to be your mom, but I am trying to be your mother. And I understood it, and I knew that hurt her. Right. So there are times when I wouldn't call her by her. I would not call her anything. I would just say, hey, can I have this? Hey, can I have that? And then she'd be like, I notice you never say mother, you don't say this or that and that. And I knew what I was doing. Right. But, so then my father would say, listen, I'll just call her stepmom. Just call her stepmom. Call her mom number 2. He said, but this disrespect would say, hey, you. Right. Which it was, but I knew what I was doing. So anyway, he said to me, this is what's going to happen next time you do it. Right. Right.
So it seems like the best advice so far, the number one thing that you said, is if you go into the situation and communicate the rules and regulations, and you sit down and say, this is what it's going to be, and then follow that. Then if you're following what we agreed upon, it takes away a lot of the potential of drama, because you say, when it happens, like, hey, this is what we agreed upon. Right. And, no different than when you get a job somewhere and they give you, this is the orientation and how we do things here, X, Y, and Z. If you break this happens. Right. If this, then that,
We got to agree on it, but let me just throw this caveat in. We can't get mad if my value is not your value. Right. And I think that's key too. Because just because you want a child to be an A student, don't mean I care if the child is an A student. So if it's my biological child and I say, I'm satisfied with C's, you can't get mad because you make your child make A's. And I don't. Because, so everyone has to recognize that going in and accept that. See, and sometimes you just have to accept some things. that one parent may say, well, I don't need my child to wash the dishes. I'll wash them. Well, okay. If that's how that parent views things,
Right.
then that's how that parent views things. You can't get mad because that's how that parent does. And so you just say, you know what? Okay, I ain't going to touch them either. So they're going to stay in the sink until you come home and you wash them. Or cut grass. If you don't think your son should cut the grass,
Right.
then you know what? I certainly ain't going to pay nobody to cut it. You and your son, that's your job. If you say your child can stay out till 4 o'clock in the morning, then you know what? That's not my rule with my kids, and my kids are going to keep their rule unless there's a legitimate reason for it. Then you got to compromise. It's nothing wrong with compromising, but I'm using the extremes, obviously. But you can't get upset if that's their rule. Like my father's rule was this about coming home. If you're not home by 11, I'll see you in the morning. That was his rule.
And it's the same thing you told Chad.
Yeah. If you ain't home by 11, I'll see you in the morning.
Right.
My stepmother was livid. How you going to tell them boys that? Because, see, really that rule only applied to me initially. Then my stepbrother said, I like that rule. I want to get some of that rule too. Right? Because we out together.
Right.
We'll be out. And he'll be like, we need to go. And I say, no, you need to go.
Right.
I ain't got to go nowhere. But it went against everything that I'm 14 years old at this time. Went against everything she believed in. What a 14-year-old doing sitting out all night long. So my father brought us all in the living room, her too. And we sitting there. And he said to her and to us, he said, let me explain to you why that's my rule. He said, because I get up 4 o'clock in the morning and go to work. At 11 o'clock, I'm going to sleep. And I don't want anybody to disturb me. I got to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
He said, so don't knock on the door. Don't do anything. Okay? That's the way it is. Deadbolt going to be on the door. I don't care what happened. Don't come in here. If your brother die, he'll be dead in the morning too. So don't bother me. Okay? That's what he said. Right. With that in mind, we tried him. You're going to try your dad. We tried him.
Right.
And lo and behold, he didn't flinch. He didn't flinch. We stayed out. We was down the pool hall. 11 o'clock came. We bored now because everybody's gone.
Right.
But we tried him anyway. We get home about 12 o'clock. And I climbed in the back of his car. My stepbrother slept on the front porch. And he woke up in the morning and said, y'all go in the house. He won't fazed by it.
Right.
Now my stepmama, she called her son in there and she laid him out and blah, blah, blah. And she's crying that, I didn't know what happened to y'all. Y'all could have been killed and all this. She genuinely was concerned. And I get all that. But they had agreed. Right. And so it is what it is. I'm not saying it's easy, but marriage is never easy.
So I wonder now what the conversation was between both of them after that incident.
Well, knowing my dad, it wasn't much of a conversation. My father didn't believe in arguing with anybody.
Yeah.
He may did when he was married to my mother. But my stepmom, I can say he learned.
Right.
My father wouldn't argue. He'd just sit there and look at you. You say everything you got to say and finally you stop talking, he'd just say, okay. That's the end of it. That's the end of the conversation.
Yeah. All right. So now, how in this dynamic in the blended family, we have talked previous podcast episodes about how the household is supposed to be ran. Does the blended family change that dynamic, or do we stick to what the Bible says we should do?
We got to stick to the Bible, and no, it doesn't. But your point is well taken, because oftentimes, if it's a blended family, that woman she's used to being the head of the household, for quite some time, because she's not jumping right into a new relationship, right?
Right.
So she's used to being head of the household. Now, the man who also is used to being head of the household, you all are coming together, and you've been used to doing your own thing. Same thing, like I say, with the finances.
Right.
She got her own car payment, you got your car payment. You got she got her credit cards, all these kind of things, and so
that's a recipe for like a major conflict and disaster.
Absolutely, and often is, and that's two main reasons. Then the families separate. Money is number one, children number two. Those are the two things: money and then children. Not infidelity, money and children. blended families rarely separate because of infidelity. Because, for the most part, you didn't deal with that kind of stuff before anyway.
Right.
You got to blend the family now, so you ain't got time no way.
Right.
You be there fighting over other stuff, right?
Right.
So then how do we deal with that? Two people who want to be head of the household, and again, that ideally that should be handled before you get married, but most people don't because you're in love, so you ain't gonna deal with that before you get married. So how do we deal with it now?
Right.
I go back to how my father dealt with it. My father recognized that she had been managing her own home. He recognized that. And so what he did was he said, hey, listen, and even though he still was head, my dad was head now, but my father said, this is what we will do, okay, is that you are responsible for your children financially, everything. I'm responsible for my child financially, everything. As far as, what happened to him. His insurance, I got on my plan. Your children's insurance, your plan. But the home, we will treat the home as if we are first-time married folk. And that's what they did. So they actually refinanced the house. So it would be that way.
Right.
Rather than it just being him. They refinanced it and did it that way. So now they're treating the house or, those tangible things as if it's them, but they're treating the children separate financially.
Right.
Which means that you control yours, I control mine. Which made it easier. I didn't say easy, but easier.
Yeah, right.
And that's one thing you have to do. And that's a changing dynamic, right? Because her children, some of them are growing older and they left out first.
Right.
And then I'm the only child that he had, which means he had a little extra spending money.
Right.
He only had me, and
right.
She had 3 children there. But that's life. Those were not his children, and I was not her child. And that doesn't mean she didn't buy me stuff every once in a while, because she did.
Right.
But it was not out of a requirement. It was out of I love you, so let me just get this for you.
Right. Right. And then also doing it that way too helps out in that dynamic of the child support dynamic, which we have now, which, you hear countless men like, I got to pay child support and this brother over here is living off my child support, and that whole, the X dynamic of everything and dealing with that drama that's involved with that. But if doing it the way that you just said and separating, the children out of the equation, and then your dad and your stepmom handle it, coming together as like we're brand new. But okay, we got this over here, and we recognize it, but together we're brand new. Right.
They compartmentalize.
Right.
That's kind of how they looked at it. Let's compartmentalize things. And it allowed them to continue to build wealth for retirement and that kind of thing. But also recognize that's not my responsibility. As far as your kids, that's your responsibility. So if they go to college, that's on you. It ain't on me.
Right.
Or whatever. And it keeps you from getting angry,
Right.
Because now you don't sit there and say, well, I'm taking care of your kids and I can't whoop them or I can't discipline them and I'm spending my money on them. It takes all that kind of frustration out. It takes all that. I'm doing all this for them and this is what's going on. It takes all that away. And so they still had their own roles, and they established their roles in the house, and that's, if you think about it, that was still him doing what the Bible says, because he was still functioning as the head of the house. He just was saying, as the head of the house, I'm going to make you the deputy,
right?
And as a deputy, this is how we're going. This is how we're going to do things, and it takes maturity, obviously, but this is how we're going to do things. And as a head, he also was a good negotiator. Because that's what it takes sometimes to help other people see the value of why they should follow you the way they're following you. And that's what he did. Now, does that mean that will work for everybody? No, because there's some men that, want to be the head in all aspects of things.
Right.
So you kind of have to recognize, in my opinion, that your job is not to run roughshod. Let me say it a biblical way. Jesus made it clear to Peter that we did not belong to Peter. You know, he told Peter, he said, if you love me, feed my sheep. He didn't say, if you love me, Peter, the sheep now belong to you.
Right.
He said, feed my sheep. I think that's the same way you should look at a blended family. If you love your wife, then you realize those are her children and not yours.
Right.
It ain't your job to try to, to run roughshod over her children. And the same thing, if she loves you, she should feel the same way. They're not her children. They are your children. Now, she can still feed them just like you can still feed her children. Right. But you recognize they don't belong to you. They belong to the other person.
Right. Now, as the people listening to this episode, a lot of them may have been in blended families like yourself. Mm-hmm. And as a child being a child in a blended family, do you remember how you felt as a kid when all this was going on? Like, did you feel animosity towards the stepmother or felt like homesick because you was in Durham? How did you feel?
I never felt animosity toward my stepmom. Not at all. She's a wonderful woman. I cannot take away from her how much she demonstrated, how much she cared for me. So she went the extra mile to make me feel at home, that she did. And so did my stepbrothers and my stepsisters. So there were times. Well, there were times I wanted to see my mom, but my father always brought me home. If I said to him, right, Dad, I want to go see my mom, he would say, well, okay, And so he never questioned it. He never. And that's one thing I think parents have to think about. That he never questioned. He never said no. He would just say, well, okay. He would say, well, listen, I can't take off this weekend, but we'll next weekend we'll go. And sometimes he would, and for the most part, he would just say, okay, and we would get up that morning and drive from Durham to Chesapeake.
Right.
I would spend time with my mother and my siblings that were up here, and we'd come right back that night. And he was because he had to do the next day. So that wasn't an issue for me. And with my stepfather, the issue for me wasn't I didn't have any animosity toward my stepfather. None at all. Not really, because the relationship did not work between him and my mother, but not because I had animosity toward him.
Right.
He was her husband, and that's how I looked at it. So I use it to my advantage, but it wasn't because there was a reason for me to do it that way. Now I'm just one of 5 children, obviously, so they may have a different take on it.
Right.
But I think the way you treat, I do know this, the way you treat your step-parent has a lot to do with how your biological parent puts them in your eyes. That's what I'm saying is this. If my father had told me, don't have that man telling you what to do. Mm-hmm. And if that man put his hands on you, you call me and I'm going to come up there and I'm going to take care of things. That would have been, then I probably would have, you can't talk to me that way. You ain't my daddy kind of deal. But my father didn't do that.
Right.
My father said to me in no uncertain terms that, you know what? That's your mama's.
So it basically starts with the adults being adults.
Absolutely. Adults have to be adults. The adults have to recognize that children are going to be children and that they have to be the mature people in the world.
So how do we get, this is the question if we were able to answer it, we'd be billionaires. But how do we get the adults that don't act like adults to magically, in this scenario, just light bulb just goes off and they turn into adults?
I think the primary issue is that we are selfish beings, right? If we can get the adults to stop being selfish and stop thinking about themselves, but think about the person you say you love, right? See, if I love my child, number one, I want my child to be well-adjusted. So to make my child well-adjusted means I have to make the environment smooth for my child, right? And so what I have to do is I have to really actively guard against aligning myself with my child over my spouse. Because that's the hard thing to do. That's your biology, that's your DNA in that child.
Right.
So it's natural to kind of feel that closeness to that child and align yourself with that child. But you have to recognize, in order for me to keep the environment nice, I can't do that. I have to make sure that triangle, myself, my child or children, and my new spouse, that love I'm showing is clear to everybody. So my children know I love this person. And since I love this person, I want you to respect this person.
Right.
Right. And vice versa, and if I am the outside spouse, right, I need to also respect that the new stepdad, hey, you know what? That's where my child is living at.
Right.
So I have to make sure that environment is a smooth environment. So I don't want to do things that cause the new stepdad to be upset with me.
Right.
Because that's not going to make the child feel better.
Right.
So if I love the child, I got to look out for how the child is going to feel better, not how I'm going to feel better.
So basically, in a nutshell, if you got a deadbeat ex-husband, what you're saying is you can't tear him down in front of your child, in front of the current husband.
Right. And I'll say this, because I think that parents should recognize that we call them deadbeats, or we call them trifling women, but that ain't it. I guess, and my point is that you have to be able to change how you view things. Right. A part of selfish is I think of me first. If I think of me first, then that means anything that doesn't fit my parameters, I see negatively. Right. But there's a reason why the dad is not giving you money. There's a reason why. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying there's a reason why. The question is, how then do I process that and see it, right? Because just like you said earlier, does the dad want to give you money to support another man?
Right.
And that may not be true, but still you have to understand that might be what he's thinking. Or the woman may be the one that's supposed to pay child support, and she might be thinking the same thing. I don't give you. Why should I give you money and you make more money than I make? So we got to be thinking about the whys of those things. See, usually if it's a woman who doesn't pay child support, and she says, "This I need every dime to survive," we say okay.
Right.
But if it's a man that says, "I need every dime to survive," we say it's not okay.
Right.
We say, "Hey, you just need to get 3 jobs."
Right.
Right. But we have to understand that dynamic works both ways. And so, hey, I'm not saying it's fair. I'm not excusing anything. But the relationship was between me and the person. So I can't damage that with the children. The children should always see their parent as being, let's say the dad is a coke crackhead, on the street, living out of a box.
Right.
The thing to do is this, and my mother did this, and I'm thankful she did this. She would always say that I don't care what happens, that's your dad. I don't care what. Now he wasn't that way, he worked and had his own home and all this stuff. But she would always say, "That's your dad. That's your father. That he is your father." I couldn't live with him, but he's your father.
Right.
And that's what we have. That's what people have to do, so that to help the child see things differently. And then if you do it enough, you'll start seeing them differently too.
Yeah. The reason I mention that is because I know I've talked to many women who've come to me and said, "Well, CB, my baby daddy ain't giving me this, that, and the other," and they fussing with him. He don't come spend time with his kids, blah, 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 blah. I said, well, how is it when he's there? Is it all hostile? Are you yelling? Are you nagging? It is, no. Then literally like 3 days after that conversation, I see her in the car driving down behind him because he's got a woman in his car. It's like, and I asked point blank, I say, "Do you want to be with him?" "No, I don't want to be with him." "Then why are you mad because he with somebody else?"
Why the animosity?
Right.
And I'll say this, ladies, on this topic. Realistically, how much time was the father spending with the child before y'all divorced?
That's a very good question.
I mean, that's the real question. Well, if he wasn't spending much time before you, if he was in the house and was watching the game while the child was playing, or was cutting the grass while the child was playing, or was working, if he wasn't doing it then, why is the expectation that when he lives in a different house, he's going to be better?
Right.
See, he's not. And I'll say this, I don't mind being personal because I don't mind putting my business in the street because I ain't got much business. When I think about the amount of hours I spent with my children when I was working, it was minimal. I worked a full-time job for the federal government, which had me traveling sometimes every other week.
Right.
Right. I was pastoring a church full-time.
Right.
And I was teaching part-time at college.
Right.
How much time you think I spent with my children?
Let alone sleep.
Right. So let's say, on average, I may have spent, I come home, from work and they already ate for the most part. Sometimes they had, but for the most part, they already ate. They outside playing. I'm tired.
Right.
I watch a little TV, and I go to bed.
Right.
Or I go to the college and then I come home, then I go to bed, whatever. Or I go to church and I come home and go to bed. So I might have really spent 30 minutes with them a day, basically.
And we're not even talking about summer preparation.
Right.
Which we talked about, I don't think on air, but we talked about that's late 15 to 20 hours right there.
Right. Now, on Saturday, I'm cutting my grass. I'm washing the cars. I'm doing that kind of stuff because I can't do it through the week.
Right.
So I'm still not spending quality time with them. They might be outside playing, but I'm not spending time with them. We all just outside, right?
Right.
Chad friends come over. I ain't playing basketball. They playing basketball.
Right.
I'm just out there doing something, right? I'm not having tea with Katrina, with tea set and all that stuff.
Right.
If I'm not living there and I spend the same little bit of time, somebody's going to say, he don't spend no time with his kids. He's deadbeat day.
Right.
So I'm saying that's the thing you have to ask yourself. See, women, generally speaking, spend more time with their children than men anyway. Generally speaking, I'm not saying all everybody's like that, but I'm saying generally speaking.
Right.
And even if I'm working, 2 jobs, when your kids are real young, men don't spend a lot of time with them.
Yeah.
You just don't. When your son gets older where you can't spend a lot of time with you, it ain't long before he don't want to spend a lot of time with you.
Right.
When he get to that age when you say, okay, now we can go to the game together. Now we can do something together. That's about 2-3 years.
Yeah.
Because after that, he like, all I want is the keys to the car.
Right. Right.
And he's gone.
Yeah. Now you think about it, now that you mention it, my dad, I saw him because I played Little League. He was a coach. I saw him as a coach for the Little League basketball and football. And then when I got in middle school, he won't coach it no more. So I ain't see him until I got home from practice. And then we talked about 30 minutes and that was it.
That's it.
Yeah.
So if your parents had been divorced during that time, it'd have been like, you don't spend no time with his kid.
Right.
No time with him. 30 minutes here and there. Because if he didn't live there, he would have spent that 30 minutes with you.
Right.
But when he came over there, it would have been 30 minutes. He was gone.
Right.
So that's why I'm just saying, I think, we sometimes we call people deadbeat, but if their habits hadn't changed, they really ain't deadbeat. They just didn't change.
Right.
So if they was barely making it when y'all was together, well, he's still barely making it.
Right.
Like he all of a sudden,
right. All of a sudden,
money.
Right. A whole bunch of money.
Yeah.
Right.
So if that's why y'all broke up because he ain't had no money, well, he still ain't got no money.
Right. And that's one thing that we are talking about in this is that if you're an ex, most likely don't think it's all the other person. There's something wrong with you as well. So you got to fix you, and preferably before you get with somebody else.
But that don't happen.
Right.
And that's the point, right?
Right.
That's one of the problems that we have. Both of you are exes because you did not have a well enough grasp, I should say, of conflict resolution.
Right.
Because if you could have resolved conflict, you wouldn't be an ex. You would have fixed the relationship. Because you didn't marry the person expecting to divorce them. You married them expecting that what? Till death do you part.
Right. For it to work out. Right.
You said, I love you. So what happened that you couldn't reconcile? It's because conflict resolution was not deep enough within your your construct to work things out. Well, most people don't go and learn conflict resolution after they get a divorce.
No.
No, you get a divorce and you just find somebody and you remarry.
Right.
So the skill you lacked the first time, you still don't have the skill, right? And that's a lot of the problem is that you have to, it's just like you said, to work on yourself. So you have to start saying, how then do I develop that skill of conflict resolution so that I don't make the same mistake that we made the first time, the blaming and you wrong and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
Because conflict resolution does not look at wrong. Conflict resolution looks at resolution.
Right.
It looks at solution oriented. It doesn't try to say who's wrong because everybody has a right to their own feelings.
Right.
This is how do we work this thing out?
I look back at what we talked about last week and about what Jesus did for us. Like, I'm focused on yourself. Mm-hmm. And one thing about in this scenario with being in a blended family, if you did nothing else but focus on yourself and gave with no intentions of getting anything in return and be selfless in this whole endeavor, everything would work itself out.
Absolutely. And
Jesus basically gave the blueprint to having a peaceful life on earth. It was like when you're able to let go of worrying about how another person thinks about you or how they feel about you, and you just, am I good to myself? Mm-hmm. And am I being good to other people? Mm-hmm. And it's just as simple as that. Because like you said, that most of the conflict comes from how I view what you did to me.
Right. It's my own value system.
Right.
And so I bring my value into it, and my values conflict with your values. And that's because we didn't develop values together. And that's what happens in a blended family, right? Because it's like, we used to call it ready-made families, when I was a kid, or instant families. It's like coffee, right?
Right.
Instant coffee does not give you that same boldness of flavor as percolated coffee.
Right. Right. That's right.
So you get instant, boom, just like that. No one has had time to adjust. So without the time to adjust, your core values are still what they were. If it was a new family, you have time to adjust because the children grow into you and you grow into them. But that's not what happens in a blended family. Nobody grows into anybody. It's just, here we are.
Now, I'm going to ask this question. Got two, male, female, got kids. Mm-hmm. Now, biblically, we're not supposed to be together until we're married.
Right. Well, but you had been married, right?
Right. So, but now we're divorced, and now two divorced people are coming together.
Right.
We cannot sleep together. So how do we go about planning that blendedness and the rules and regulations how we stated before? Because we know how things roll. Mm-hmm. It's kind of hard to do that when two separate households.
Well, let me say this: whether you're married or unmarried, whether you have children or don't have children, the same rules apply, right?
Right.
Because fornication is fornication. I don't care where.
Right. That's right.
Where you got kids or not, it's still fornication, right? So it's easy. It's really easy. If you look at it the same way you look at employment, because a marriage is a contractual relationship, mm-hmm. right? Now, when you go on a job, do you require the job to conform to you or to you to conform to the job?
For me to conform to the job.
Absolutely. See, but we don't go into marriages like that.
Right.
We go into marriages saying, you have to conform to me.
Right.
But what we should do is say, I'm going in the opposite. I'm going to conform to the rules of what the new job title is, right? So I'm going to go in, if I'm a woman, I may have been the head of the household all this time, but my new role is now to not be the head of the household. And that's what I'm going to take on the role as. And that man should take on the same role. I'm going to take on the role of what? I'm going to be to that woman what Christ is to the church, right? And Christ supplies all needs. That's what Paul says. He supplies all. He's persuaded that he supply all your needs. So that if I go in with that role, right, I got my rules then, right? And my rules are, what is her needs regarding her children? Mm-hmm. It's straight up. What are her needs regarding her children? That's a part of what my role is to do that. And how do I fit her needs with my value system? But my core value system has to be what? Her needs first, right?
Right.
Her core value system has to be what Proverbs says a woman should be, as far as, in the home, and how she should manage her home. She should be the manager of the home. That should be her core value. And so if she used that as her core value, and he used that as his core value, we don't have to have lived together.
Right.
Just like you don't have to have been on the job to go on the job and become a part of whatever, that culture is on the job.
All right, because we already have the rules and regulations.
Got the rules and regulations right there.
All right. So anything you like to bring up before we close out?
Just hope everybody have a wonderful 2021, and make sure you tune back in 2022. We love you, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the new year.
All right. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everybody. This is your host, CB Baker. Till next time.